I'm Ryan Quinn. I'm the Director of Software Development at Certus Innovations. I've been with the company for about 7 years at this point. I was the first person hired besides the founders. I started off doing IoT development and really whatever needed to be done around the company as we transitioned into cloud development and web development and now into machine learning, which is not my specialty, but that's why I have these guys. Or as Sinclair would say, he has us. But we are very excited about the next couple of years of TeamML and how we are going to bring machine learning and mobile machine learning in particular into the modern age in the tech ecosystem.
I'm Sinclair Gurney. I'm the senior machine learning engineer at Certus Innovations. So they brought me on originally to do some data science and visualization sort of stuff and moved on to more and more machine learning. Now we're doing acoustic machine learning, that sort of thing, but we're going to talk more about that later.
I'm Eric Donor. I've been working with Certus for 2.5 weeks. I'm the junior machine learning engineer, I guess. And I've been working largely on data pre-processing, feature extraction, things like that.
And I have a doctorate in physics.
That's true. Please don't call me Dr. Donor.
Say it for the camera.
Please don't call me Dr. Donor.
Certus Innovations is an information technology company in upstate New York. We are currently located in Albany. We have a long history of doing contracting with the Department of Defense, mostly the Department of the Air Force. We got started doing IoT tracking, so helping out with logistics shipments and tracking those shipments through the regular aerial port system, ideally to their end destinations, helping make sure that Air Force cargo doesn't get lost. After that project, we transitioned more into doing cloud development and web development. One of our flagship projects, which has gotten the most traction throughout the Air Force, is called RHINO, which is a system for tracking vehicle maintenance and vehicle records. It saves hundreds, in some cases thousands of hours per unit per year of manpower that can then be spent on other tasks and streamlines the collection of maintenance records for ground vehicles across the Air Force and hopefully one day beyond that. This project, TeamML, started 2 years ago as a Phase 2 SBIR. We've recently received a tactical funding increase for another 24 months to continue development. The primary focus of TeamML is to bring audio-based machine learning to the TAC ecosystem, which we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but TAC is one of the DoD's main technologies for providing a common operating picture to users in the field. TeamML recognizes that there's a deficiency in the machine learning field in general, and particularly the mobile machine learning field, between what is possible with vision-based models, so image segmentation and anything off of your camera, and what can be done with audio-based models, which is, you'd think that in some cases, well, maybe it's one-to-one, but there are some differences in just the nature of vision versus audio and the nature of what people need to get out of that, the information that they need, which are critical to the development of TeamML and what helps to set our TeamML technologies apart from previous work in both computer vision and computer-based audio processing. In TeamML, we have 3 main sub-projects that we're pursuing, all relating to audio-based mobile machine learning. One of them is DART, which is for gunshot detection, classification, and localization. A lot of older systems that did gunshot detection, they would just say, oh, that was loud, that must be a gunshot. And yeah, gunshots are generally very loud, though, as Sinclair reported from our last data collection, that's not always the case. And in fact, there were a few files that he handed me where he was like, there are 30 gunshots in here. I'm like, yeah, I don't know, buddy. I only see 20. He's like, well, the last gun was pretty quiet, so it probably didn't pick it up. So it's not just about, oh, that's loud, that must be a gunshot. Lots of things are loud, and most of them are not gunshots. That's why there is some nuance in the machine learning that we have to do and the digital signals processing, hopefully, that we need to do in order to fully mature that technology. And then once we have determined, oh yes, this is indeed a gunshot, the next step is to figure out what kind of gunshot was it. Because, maybe you say, well, a gunshot's a gunshot, right? And the answer is kind of, it depends. It depends on the circumstances that you're in. If you're in a hostile situation and the Dart app can tell you someone is firing 5.56 NATO, then, okay, that's probably one of the, that's probably Blue Forces, right? That's probably one of your guys. There's probably still a bad sign if they're shooting, but at least it means that they're not getting shot at, hopefully. Whereas if someone is firing if the app says, oh, someone's firing 7.62 Soviet, a lot of it, okay, well, that's probably a much worse situation that you're going to want to deal with. So how do you deal with it? And that's where the localization comes in. And that's how Eric got involved with the company originally, actually, back in December, somewhere around
November, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we brought Eric on to do some contract work because we were working on some gunshot localization. So to say, well, where did the person fire from? Which direction were they firing? Maybe. We'll see on that one. Now you know where the person is firing from. You can maneuver more effectively to keep our operators in the field safe. And we ran into some really gnarly math. And the people we're working with said, we would really need someone who was really into matrix algebra and calculus and understood how to diagonalize all these matrices. I'm like, hold on, I know a guy who's been talking to me about diagonalizing matrices for the last 15 years. So, hey, I got you this job, so that's cool. So, the Dart technology is somewhere in the TRL5 to TRL6 range. So it is ready for field testing. It is currently available from tech.gov/plugins/Dart if you have a tech.gov account. We are about to start moving it out into the field and getting that technology matured. We have a similar technology, or at least it seems similar on the surface, called FALCON, which is for drone detection, classification, and localization. So drones in this case, we're talking about generally small quadcopters and hexcopters, the sort of thing that has become very popular in the war in Ukraine, that are used for primarily one-way attacks or reconnaissance, those sorts of missions. They're cheap, they're effective, they get around current countermeasures very easily. Audio is one of the underexplored ways in being able to detect and ideally identify and then bring in other technologies to defeat the drones. So the identification part is important because we have a coworker, Sean, who was deployed to some of these forward positions where they would expect to encounter hostile drones, and the systems that they had would have them shooting down crows specifically. He was really mad about that, but even more mad about the fact that they would often shoot down UK drones if the UK guys forgot to call ahead. And then, 20 minutes later, even angry British guy showing up like, you shot down my $100,000 drone. I'm like, okay, sorry, bro, call ahead next time. So ideally, with Falcon, you wouldn't need to worry about that. Localization for Falcon is not something that we had explored previously, but I think, Eric, it was you and John last year, right, who were talking about doing the Doppler and the spectrum compression.
I don't know if I was talking about that with John, but yeah, the general idea is, if an ambulance drives by you, the pitch changes. And that's sort of the most familiar example of the Doppler effect for sound waves that most people have thought of. But you get the same effect with any other sound where the source is moving past you. And if you have multiple ways of detecting that sound, you may be able to multilaterate to localize where that's coming from, basically from the fact that you're going to get a different Doppler shift from each sensor.
And another thing to note on that is drones are making like a constant buzzing sound. So if it's making the same sound the entire time, unless it's significantly changing speed or doing something, if it's moving in a constant direction at a constant speed, that buzzing sound is going to have that Doppler effect. And that's kind of where the most important aspect of that sound comes from when it's moving.
And part of what makes Falcon different from other technologies is that we can use the cell phones as a distributed sensor network. So if you have one phone and the drone is going past, all you can tell is, like Eric said, it's going past. But if you have two phones and they both say, yeah, it's going past us like this, then at the same time, then you know that it has to be traveling between them because that's the only reasonable solution. Maybe you can't say exactly where it is, but it's a lot better to be able to say, yeah, it's over there and it's going that way than it is to say, yeah, somewhere around here is a drone, maybe with a bomb straps to it. So some of the pushback that we've gotten with Falcon is that, well, like what's the detection range on it? And the answer is so far it feels like about as far as a human could hear it, but that's a human who is listening for it, who is not wearing hearing protection, which if you are out there shooting, you probably want hearing protection on. And if you're out there doing your job, then you are probably not, ideally, right? You're not constantly listening, scanning the area around you, thinking, oh God, is there a drone? Right? That's terrible. So if Falcon can take some of that cognitive load off of you and be always listening when you are focused on doing something else, then the expectation is that it can increase safety and survival rates under those conditions.
And another thing on the hearing protection part is a lot of the people out in the field are wearing active hearing protection, not just passive hearing protection.
That's a good point.
So it allows them to hear, basic things that are going on because it filters out sounds of stuff that you wouldn't want to hear and make sure it allows in the sounds that you do want to hear. But drones so far have been a sound that you don't want to hear. It's a buzzing noise that would want to be filtered out.
It.
Exactly, yeah. So it's a sound that would be filtered out by those active noise canceling sort of systems, which means that you have operators out in the field and they probably would expect their hearing protection to allow them to hear that sort of thing, and it wouldn't. So it's not only just that when they are wearing hearing protection, they can't hear it as well. It's they might have a false understanding of the fact that they might think they can hear that, but they actually won't.
That's a good point, because active noise cancellation, to my understanding, basically looks at things that have been happening and then says, okay, well, if it's always there, then that's part of the background.
Yep.
So if a drone is just hanging out, buzzing, then my expectation is that would kind of get rolled into the background, and you would say, and the hearing protection would say, that's something that we want to get rid of. It doesn't have that short time energy that we're looking for as an interesting signal to pass through. Getting back to TAC, it is a technology that's been around the DoD for a while. It is something that I remember not loving integrating with back when I was doing software-defined radio, because people don't really understand software-defined radio, but they do understand TAC. So
Ryan, what is TAC?
TAC, the Team Awareness Kit or Tactical Assault Kit, depending on who you are, is you guys play video games, right? How dare you? TAC is, in a lot of video games, real-time strategy, or some shooters like Halo, I don't know about other ones, you get a little mini-map that tells you where your guys are, where the bad guys are, and then tries to draw some delineation between them. Maybe in some games like Age of Empires 2, you can flare on a map to say there's something of interest here, or you need to pay attention to this, or there are other League of Legends. You can do all kinds of flares to say this guy's gone, right? And so TAC tries to bring that same sort of capability to the end users in the field. So everyone has, and normally they have a chest harness that lets them strap the device right to their chest, and then, which is convenient for us because it means the microphone is always pointed out. But then they can flip it open and they have their map available to them right there with all of their special technology, so they can see, okay, here's the blue forces, here's where they marked off where the red forces are, and they can attach additional metadata to those, like that's an artillery piece, or there's some piece of hostile material here that we have to get to. You put a bloodhound trace on something to have your guys vector in on it. So there's a lot of options that just in the base package of TAC. And then there are all kinds of additional technologies that you can add on. WearTAC is a group that we've worked with before that puts TAC into smartwatches. So it's way cheaper and you just get more technology and more capability at the same price point. And there's another group that we worked with out of Boston, I believe, Rain Technologies, we don't have any kind of affiliation with them, but they have a great technology for monitoring the health of people with WearTAC watches or with other gear that plugs into ATAC. And then you can take a look at your map and be like, okay, everyone seems to be doing fine, except that one guy has a heart rate of 180 beats per minute, and someone should go check on that. There was also, at CivTAC last year, I talked to this cop from White Plains, New York, who was saying that there's some pushback in the first responder community of, I don't want you monitoring my heart rate when I'm out there. And his counterpoint was, yeah, but like, if there's two guys that are chasing a suspect and one of them has a heart rate of 180 and the other one has a heart rate of 85, maybe let's let the guy with the heart rate of 85 make contact first so no one ends up on the news, which seems reasonable. So that's the benefit of TAC from a technical standpoint for us is that everyone gets TAC. There's no surprises there, right? If you go to your average military person and say, I have a TAC plugin, they'll say, okay, great, how can I get it? It kind of gets you over that barrier of initial adoption of, okay, well, we have 40,000 users in the Department of Defense and 250,000 users overall. They all know TAC. They understand how TAC plugins work. They understand how to install TAC plugins. And TAC plugins, if they are signed through tac.gov, which Dart is, as is TAC Talk, they can then get those plugins integrated into their multi-device management system like Watchtower, and you can just push that plugin out to your entire unit. If you want those people to have it, you don't have to worry about the configuration management. It's all taken care of for you. And the TAC Product Center is always improving the product of TAC, so you have that built-in support from the DoD for your technology, and you don't have to worry about the maintenance process on your end. All right, so let's talk gunshot detection, classification, and localization. Sinclair, I know the different use cases for this outside of the military are something that you've talked about a lot, and you are the one who wrote the initial proposal, so do you want to get us kicked off?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot of guns out there in a lot of different situations. So
1 billion guns, as you like to remind me.
Yeah. Certain metrics put it around 1 billion, which means that, they're everywhere. They're civilians, military, public safety. And, again, because these guns are in all these situations, they can be utilized in a lot of different situations as well. And that means that, detecting and classifying these gunshots have a lot of applications too. So, in military, obviously, there's operators out there. They have to know when they're getting shot at, or if there's distant gunshot, like what's going on. In other situations, public safety, obviously there could be like mass shootings or other incidents like that, which you'd want to know about as soon as possible. And then even in environmental conservationist sort of situations, poachers, other things like that. When you have poachers in a large, open wilderness area, there's no better way to hear the gunshot than just by hearing it. Like, you can't see the poachers because it's a massive amount of open area. You can't have that many cameras, but you can hear the gunshots from a significant distance away. So that makes it like the most cost-effective way to detect gunshots in most cases.
Well, and I think that's the best, I don't want to say best case scenario for poaching, because obviously, but would be the, kind of classical thinking, poaching like in the African savanna, right? But we found when we started this project, we found that data set of the anti-poaching data set from Brazil, I think it was, where it was 99% rainforest sounds and then 1% distant gunshots. And I don't know if you actually listened to any of those clips, but it is not easy to even hear the gunshots over the deafening sound of the rainforest. And you're definitely not going to see a guy poaching in the rainforest. That is one of the primary traits of the rainforest. Yeah, I think it's one of those ways that it scales very nicely. And a couple months ago, we were talking to Joe Austin at 9 Hill Technologies about drone detection. And he said that the metric that they have tried to optimize for is dollars per square kilometer of detection, which is an interesting way to measure it. It's not just like, well, it's this accurate or it can go this far, but sure, if you can detect, I can detect out to 10 kilometers, but it costs $100,000. People aren't going to pay for that. But we've built the detectors off of like $100 of hardware with the Raspberry Pis, and it worked great. So, it's very scalable, both in terms of just, dollar amounts and then the actual amount, the, size and weight and power of the technology required. So one of the kind of foundational technologies that I think got us started down the path of Dart, and something that you mentioned a lot in the proposal was Boomerang, which was originally developed by, I think they were Raytheon at the time, now RTX, which was it was used extensively during the war in Iraq to track down where snipers were located. And when we actually received the Boomerang code, there was a lot of good stuff about Boomerang. You're not going to find any bad press about it online, and it worked very well with the hardware that it had, with the software that it had at the time that it was used under those conditions. And that's great because that's exactly what it needed to do at that time. Then we saw the software and the math behind it and the assumptions that it made, and realized that perhaps not all of those things that were true for Boomerang were still true now. That's when I called Eric and I said, buddy, how would you like to do a whole bunch of math for me?
Math. I love math.
Exactly.
Sometimes. I love getting paid to do math. Yeah, the linear algebra involved in taking a bunch of sensor detections and saying where did that bullet come from turns out to be non-trivial. And it's funny because the physics of the problem is something you could teach to a first-year undergrad. Extracting useful information from that problem is not a fully solved problem after however long. It's a problem that scales very strangely.
Yeah, I noticed that once you and John started digging into it more and looking at some of the assumptions that underpinned Boomerang, it reminded me of, what's that famous physics approximation? The spherical cow in space.
Mm-hmm.
That you're like, well, where did that number come from? You can't just put a number here. And so that was, I think, a big part of it was realizing the, not limitations of the system, but the design decisions that they made to make it make sense in that context.
Well, for example, they had, as I understand Boomerang, you had dedicated hardware. You had arrays of sensors where you knew exactly where each sensor was in relation to each other. And those constraints actually make a big difference to how you solve the problem and depending on what you're doing, if the problem is solvable. So having an array of sensors where they're all in a line, you know exactly how far the sensors are spaced apart. They had very nice sensors, as I recall. Not a cell phone mic, but something very, a little bit more like this. And that makes a huge difference, for example. It turns out the math for the problem is just much more tractable. Doing the physics is much more tractable to do localization, i.e. where bullet come from, when your sensors are all in a line.
And especially too, when it comes to gunshots are so quick, and the sample rate and the quality of the actual audio matters so much because you only have a fraction of a second to actually hear that. So the more samples, the more resolution you have, it's going to make the gunshot so much more clear. You can get more information out of it.
There is one group up in Montana. Robert C. Maher has published tons of conference papers on this, but they have used incredibly high sample rate equipment, like 500,000 samples per second, more than 10 times what we have access to really very nicely sample the ballistic shockwave and then the muzzle blast. And they developed what they called Eric, I don't know if I've sent you pictures of this yet, but the quasi-anechoic data collection environment, which anechoic being that there's not a lot of echoes. And so quasi-anechoics are like, what does that mean? That's not a real scientific term. It turns out that what they do is they put a guy up on top of a ladder and have him shoot. So when they're doing it with 9mm or with a revolver, is it okay? Yeah, I mean, I guess personally, would I fire 9mm from the top of a ladder? No, but I can see how you could get insured for that. And then the next paper they come out, they have a full-powered rifle, a 308 Winchester, a very beefy hunting rifle, and the guy's up on top of a ladder with all the microphones hoisted 10 feet off the ground, shooting past the microphones, and I'm not insured for that. I don't know what kind of.
And it's not even like a step ladder. It's a whole full size ladder. He's quite a few number of feet off the ground, and he's shooting a high powered rifle off of it. So
I mean, they got really good data.
You do, yeah.
So but his contention was that most gunshot audio data sets tell you more about the location than they do about the gun, and I don't disagree with that. But when you're shooting a gun, you're always at a location, which sounds like a dumb thing to say, but that was one of the big things. When we met up with Zev to do that, from Zev Nadler from UAS Strategic to do that test, and he was saying, yeah, I've shot guns in all kinds of different places, and depending on where you're standing or the weather or whatever else is going on, it's just so much different. It's like, so if you've seen one urban environment, you've seen one urban environment. So how are you dealing with that? To which you replied, we are doing the best we can, yeah. Which is, to be fair, more than anyone else is doing.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. When it comes to collecting the data, you just have to collect the data in as many situations as you can, because that's pretty much the only thing you can do. You cannot, you technically can collect gunshots and have a perfectly perfectly anechoic situation, or you can try to set up these gunshots in that sort of situation. You can try to get, perfect empty fields to shoot your guns and like nothing around, but that's not realistic. And then when you actually try to run the models that you trained on that, big field data, it's not going to work at the moment there's a single echo. If there's a hill that the gunshot sound is bouncing off of, or there's a building in the way, the acoustic environment matters significantly for loud sounds such as gunshots. When it comes to drones, it's different because it's a buzzing sound. It comes from the high in the air, so it isn't affected in the same way. When you hear a helicopter flying, you hear a helicopter flying from a good distance away. It doesn't matter if you're standing next to a building or in a field, it still sounds like a helicopter. But when you hear the echo of the gunshot bouncing off a building or bouncing off a hill or coming around something, it's going to sound very different.
I grew up in the foothills of the Catskills. Speaking of sort of hunting environments, callback, you could hear a gunshot during hunting season bounce off of 3 or 4 different hills. And it would sound very different than if you just went out into the field and were firing one yourself.
Yeah, and so that's why we collect our data at only the finest locations, at places that are 1/2 working farm, 1/2 junkyard, but also in the middle of those two things, there's a shooting range. Don't say I never took you to a place nice. But that data is definitely not as clean as most training data sets. And it is... Well, it was supposed to handle localization, but it turns out that if you take the batteries out of Raspberry Pi, the clock resets, and didn't manage to get that. But we did get a lot of audio of microphones being shot at, which is important for the military use case, maybe not as much for public safety. But there are already good data sets out there for public safety. You have the Cadre Forensics data set, you have the University of Florida data set, and now I forget what it stands for, C3GD.
Certus Caliber Classification Gunshot
Dataset,
yeah.
Which is the only dataset that encompasses the exact parameters that we chose.
Yeah.
Speaking of localization, one of the big things that you helped with when we were doing the localization originally is figuring out what kind of assumptions were made by Boomerang. Why is it always Mach 2 that they choose? Oh, well, that's because that's 7.62x39, which is the most common rifle that people who are not NATO members are going to use. And then you kept digging into it, and you're like, well, no, that's the speed that it is when it leaves the muzzle. And then we went down that rabbit hole. Suddenly, I have to go back to UAlbany for the first time in 10 years since I left in disgrace and try to pull papers from the library for you.
Papers.
And, yeah. You uncovered a lot about the nature of what people do and don't understand about gunshot localization that I was surprised about. One of the big weaknesses in the literature that we identified was that it seems like a lot of people who are doing this work don't really understand guns. At one point, they said, one of the papers said, one of the good ones said, well, 7.62 comes in 2 different lengths, 39 and 51 millimeters, and those are not really that different. So the length is not going to be that different when the bullet's in flight. And we can kind of, yes, exactly, right. Because those dimensions cover the casing and the bullet, and the actual bullet is way, way smaller than that. And you can look in the paper and see the picture of the bullet with the whole casing still attached to it, with the shockwave attached to the front of the bullet and the back of the casing. And you're like, okay, the math in here is solid, but I feel like they have a fundamental misunderstanding of what we're doing.
Or of what comes out of the barrel of a gun. But yeah, and there's other things like your bullet is experiencing air resistance. It's slowing down as it moves.
Not a spherical cow in a vacuum.
Yes. It's not even a conical bullet in a vacuum. It's not in a vacuum. Yeah,
Oh
I
God.
know. And if it's a supersonic bullet, which is pretty common, the shockwave produced by it traveling faster than the speed of sound, supersonic, is also a sound that you can hear. You can pick up with your ears or with a cell phone microphone. Just sounds like sort of a snapping.
Now, according to
cracking
Gemini,
noise.
it's not technically a sound. How do you plead?
I'm calling it a sound because it's a pressure wave in the atmosphere.
On account if you can hear it.
Yeah.
I can hear it. That
If a
makes it a
tree
sound.
falls in the woods, doesn't make a sound.
You can actually extract even more information about the location of the shooter sometimes from the shockwave itself, as well as the muzzle blast, which is the sound of the bullet, sound of the firearm going off. We also found that it's highly non-trivial, as an old professor of mine used to say, to actually use that shockwave information. Flip side being that muzzle blast has its own issues.
So you brought up an old professor, which then makes this in scope. Your background is in physics, not machine learning necessarily, though I know you did a lot of programming as part of your doctorate, published a couple times in PhysRevB, which is very impressive. Come on, man. You published twice as first author in PhysRevB. That's cool.
It is cool. I'm getting hyped up. You're hyping me up.
You know, that was one of the reasons that when we had a spot open up on the TACFI, it was shortly after, you told me, I'm looking for a new job. I just want something where I can do a lot of math and physics and learn some machine learning. And then a couple of days later, talking to Pete, and he says, you got this like kind of skill hole in your project here, where you need someone who wants to do a lot of math and physics and maybe some machine learning. And what are you going to do about that? I was like, Pete, you're not going to believe this, but I might actually know the guy for that. So I know your background is more in like quantum and stuff, but my understanding is that some of the math is somewhat similar because waves
And also, like I said, the actual physics of the problem, or understanding the physics of the problem. A bullet moving through the air creates a shockwave, and the gun going off creates a muzzle blast. That's more of a real sound than a shockwave. That's fairly straightforward. It just turns out that dealing with some sort of quasi-matrix inversion to get your linear regression working, et cetera, that's a little more tricky. But yes, I did a lot of linear algebra in my PhD.
When there's one of the papers that you pulled up, it was about bullet slowing models, I think, and I was reading. I was trying to dig into the math of it, which is not my specialty. According to my SAT scores, I have a much better verbal than math, which I don't know how that got me here, but here we are.
Programming was a language.
So that's true, yeah. And then I looked at them. I was like, wait a minute, this is a Taylor series. No.
Who are you going to call?
Yeah, I was like, there's only one person that I would trust to solve a Taylor series like this. So I also don't know that many physicists, but you were on the top of my list.
That's lucky for you.
Pete, for those of you who don't know him, is president of Certus Innovations. He's my boss. Your boss is too. And he's got a great tech background, used to work at Accenture, excellent cloud programmer, and more importantly for this discussion, he really understands budgeting for projects. So when he said, you can definitely slide another guy in here, that's how we knew it was time to go and find someone who had the skill set to fill that role. And I think what makes this team so appropriate to this problem is that when we are doing audio machine learning of guns, you need to understand all of those things. So we got into this not really knowing very much about guns. We all grew up in New York. I mean, I know you grew up in rural New York, but we all grew up in New York, right? It's a blue state. New York loves gun control. So we had a lot of learning to do there, and that's a big deficiency from what we've seen, especially reading into the literature of people. They don't know guns. They're like, I fired an M16A1. No, I really don't think that was the case. I think it was some other AR knockoff that you were firing. Or they'll say, well, I can fire 7.62 or 2.23. I'm like, okay, well, they look identical, but they sound different, which we have proven time and again.
Yep.
And then when it comes to the machine learning portion of things, there are so many different models out there on Papers with Code, rest in peace, that we could look into. You get ResNets, RexNets, EfficientNets, which, by the way, is just MobileNet. It's all MobileNet under the hood. EfficientNet, RexNet, it all comes back to MobileNet. But you need to be able to choose the right one for the job. Everyone's like, oh, transformers, attention is all you need. Well, attention doesn't help on gunshots. Sorry. It does massively increase the amount of processing power that you need. So we understood guns pretty well. I can write the software that we need to help manage the data sets and to, abstract away some of the gory programming details. Sinclair knows machine learning, and we have some understanding of signal processing, sort of. But then you hit a point where you need someone who really understands signals and math and ideally audio, maybe someone who has a doctorate in physics and a background in music.
That is true.
So, right. So you understand sound and math and physics and how all of those things fit together for the problem that we're solving, right? It was you were like 2 hours into the job and we were going through that slide deck, and I was like, yeah, it's an impulsive sound. And you're like, oh, well, you can't model an impulsive sound as a sum of sines. Like, okay, thank you. It took me 2 years to get to that point, and you've gotten there in 2 hours. So that is, I think, a big part of why our team is going to be very successful in this TACFI, because there are 3 things that you need. Eric covers one, Sinclair covers one, we all kind of cover the other, and I am also there. So,
and another thing to note is, when we get to like past the point we're currently at, we've passed kind of the place that a lot of the other academic papers and other available research has hit. You have to do something different in order to actually, push the state of the art further. Like we've tried the architectures that they've tried. We've tried the, data sets they have available, and, all are insufficient for our use case. Like when you're actually dealing with gunshots in a realistic situation, the current existing technology just doesn't fit together. So we need to experiment with new, feature extraction methods. We need to build bigger data sets. We need to try different architectures, and all 3 of those things are what we're working on.
And ideally, there's some systems programming in there.
Yeah.
Look, and there's some sense in which drone detection is the inverse of gunshot detection, because with gunshot detection, you have these very short timescales that are things that are where your signal processing is difficult because all of the existing signal processing techniques are adapted for largely music and voice, which are lower frequency, longer timescales. And so you have one set of sort of ideas you have to deal with for gunshot detection. With a drone, you have a sound that is very well described by actual frequencies, longer timescales. So in some sense, it's almost you turn the problem inside out and you get drones.
Yeah, and that's not just from a technical perspective, but also from a user experience perspective, that if you detect a gunshot, you just put that on the dashboard, right? Like you're not going to maybe I just reported a gunshot, maybe I shouldn't report another. No, it's a gunshot. Put it on the dashboard. But if you're detecting a drone, the drone's probably going to hang out for ideally a few seconds. Otherwise, you have serious problems that you don't want to just say, oh, look, there's a drone. You know what? No, I know. You just told me that. And so there's so much that's different about the conceptualization of the problem, even though it's the same sort of safety and survivability problem. That's something that you've talked about a lot, of the like drones in Ukraine and stuff, something that you are always finding articles about.
Yeah, I mean, the use of drones in the war in Ukraine is like orders of magnitude larger than it's ever been used before. Not only are they utilizing off-the-shelf DJI drones and that sort of thing for like more reconnaissance, they're using FPV drones to drop ordnance in certain positions and that sort of thing, which means that because they're different types of drones, they're being utilized in different situations, the use case in which you'll be on the other side of that and hearing the drone is different. Like you might be listening to a slow-moving, high-altitude reconnaissance drone, or you might be listening to a drone that's flying at you at 80 miles an hour. And, the only reasonable way, especially for people that are actually out in the field, is audio, because you're not going to have the other radar or cameras or other things that are pointing in the right direction to hear those things. And then especially nowadays, we're dealing with different vision, night vision, thermal, and that sort of thing. And those also go along with those things. Like if you have a thermal, a drone with a thermal camera on it, you're not like hiding from it. Like it's going to see you, and you need to know that it sees you very quickly, especially at night where thermal is a bigger deal. The audio is going to come out even clearer. So audio is the most, efficient and effective way to hear these drones, especially when they are moving quickly, and you need to have an effective, omnidirectional sensor, which will work for these applications.
That's a good point about the day and night cycles of these things, because that's a big piece of pushback that vision models get in the military sometimes, is if you remember that big argument about with Watchtower. Like, I don't want people using day models at night. Like, oh, but what if the only option for the guy is to use a day model at night? And you can kind of see both sides of the argument, right? Like, things look different in the day than they do at night, or with, EOIR versus, right? But as you've pointed out many times, things sound the same in the day and in the night. Now, maybe if you're in the house by yourself, you don't, like, psychologically, that's not true. But physically, it's the same. People also say that audio is omnidirectional, and that's not true. I learned this recently when I was deaf in the one year for like 3 months. And we learned that my wife is always on the left-hand side of me for some reason. No matter where we are, she's always on the left-hand side of me, which was unfortunate because hearing is actually slightly directional. But that's why this is a great, this works out great for TAC, because if they have the phone strapped to their chest, then the microphone is always pointing wherever they're going. So you get that somewhat more so than EOIR, at least, omnidirectionality. And you can use it in at day and night if there's smoke. Probably not in the rain, though, but they're not going to be flying drones in the rain, so problem solved.
That's true.
Now, what does EOIR stand for?
Oh, it's electro-optical infrared.
Oh, okay.
Not something that we deal with, but other people who do EOIR for drones, there's a few companies we've talked to about it. There's a lot of, it works pretty well, but it's I don't want to say basic image segmentation, because image segmentation is hard, but, they basically, they chip out the drone in the sky, and it pairs nicely with both audio and radar, and that's kind of the name of FALCON, Forward Aerial Layer Countermeasures Operations Network. And the forward as in you don't need a lot of infrastructure to go along with it. And then layered countermeasures, no sensor is going to work 100% of the time in 100% of cases. Vision is great if you're looking at something. Audio is great if you can hear something, which maybe not, right? Like if you're standing next to a giant idling diesel engine, maybe you don't want to use audio then. But counterpoint, your camera is also going to be pointed towards the car.
Another thing to consider with cameras, right? Like you can't passively use a camera most of the time. If you have a base and you have like mounted cameras or surveillance cameras, like they're doing something. But if you're out in the field, you have to actively hold the camera and point it at something, where you do not have to do the same thing with microphones and audio. Your device is most likely going to be in a location where even if it's in your pocket, like it can still hear stuff when it's there. It won't be, ideal. Again, it's not going to be fully omnidirectional because, the microphone's on a particular side of the device. It's going to be, occluded by yourself or something else, but it's more omnidirectional and more passive than a lot of other sensors.
Yeah, and I want to go back to what we talked about before about taking some of the psychological burden off of the operator. There was last year, I was at an outdoor MMA event the crowd was pretty loud. There was music playing between the matches, and I saw a drone on the other side of the ring that had been videoing it, right? And at some point I lost track of it, and then I hear it behind me, and I'm like, well, I don't remember when it got back there, but I can clearly hear it, right? If I'm hearing it over the crowd, even though it's not the primary sound in that environment, I can still hear it. So that's when I tried FALCON on it, and it didn't work. And that's when I came back to you the next Monday, like, Sinclair, we got to turn that signal to noise ratio way down. Just get more noise in there. I don't ever want to be surprised by a drone like that again. But then, then the next match started, and I start focusing on that, and then the drone leaves, and I see it, because there's only one drone, I see it appear on the other side of the ring, and I'm like, well, I didn't track that, because, yes, I was physically capable of hearing it, but I wasn't listening for it, because that wasn't my primary task at the time. So if you're at one of those forward deployed bases, or you're in some kind of convoy or something, right, and you have a job to do, and not always is that job listen for a drone to make sure it's not sneaking up on me. Or if that had been a bad guy's drone.
Yeah.
I don't like that you keep reminding me that we have never seen a drone-related terror attack or mass casualty event in the United States, but it could happen any day now. Thanks.
It could, yeah.
Yes, but you don't need to tell me that every week.
Yeah. But it is a big concern because drones are everywhere. They're very quick. It doesn't look like a scenario where something can happen. You just see a drone flying. You don't know what it's doing. You don't know what's on it. And that's kind of the scariest part is not only can there be one drone, there can be 20, there can be 30. They can be automated. And that's even worse. The drone being so modular and simple means that you can use it in almost any scenario. Like there's situations where people are using small drones to go into buildings to clear them, whereas before you'd have to bring in, several soldiers, which are capable of like CQB operations, and now you can safely just fly a drone into those situations. You can do all sorts of things with drones that we wouldn't have thought possible with other things, which means, that's on both sides. Like we can do that and other people can do that as well. We have less drones currently than a lot of the other countries building these things. So there's a concern on both sides, both that we don't have enough effective countermeasures and that we're not capable of doing the same thing as them. Even if you see a drone flying at you, how are you going to shoot it? Like you can't shoot a fast-moving object like that with, your standard firearms. Maybe you have a shotgun, but not everybody carries shotguns in those sorts of situations. So, like, again, we don't have enough stuff. Like, oh, there's jammers, but what if it's a fiber optic drone? Like, oh, there's ways to jam this or that. It's like, but again, because drones are so modular, you can make a version which countermeasures any of the other available options.
And I think that goes back to what we talked about before about the need for a layered defense system. That that people say, oh, RF countermeasures, that's nothing because they'll just use a fiber optic drone. But would you rather that the guy is 10 miles away with a coffee with his feet up on the desk, just piloting it with his Logitech controller or whatever, or would you rather that there's a line that connects the drone directly to the guy's face? Probably the second one. At the very least, he's in more danger now, and you can get to him faster and more easily than if they were remote, right? And there are other physical countermeasures that can work. And some people say, well, it's not going to work in all cases, so I don't want that. And I think it's a very defeatist mentality. Like, the F-35, right, the greatest fighter jet ever created, completely unstoppable. If you walk up to it and shoot it with a 9mm handgun, you've just done $20 million in damage and put one of the United States' best military assets out of commission for at least 2 weeks while they get parts shipped from the United States to Syria or whatever. It's not a reason not to use an F-35. You just, it has to be the right tool and the right job, and you have to make sure that you have guys, ideally with Dart and Falcon, at the base to protect that F-35 from the guy who wants to shoot it once with his handgun.
I mean, we've seen that exact same sort of thing in the war in Ukraine, where the Ukrainians have flown drones thousands of miles inland by hiding them via trucks or other situations, and blew up millions, if not billions, of dollars of bombers and other air defense systems with that exact same sort of mentality. Like a small explosion on an expensive bomber is going to put it out of commission. You can't fly with a piece of your wing missing. Like even if it's a tiny little piece, that means it's out of commission, even though you didn't actually blow it up with a whole missile. A little bit of damage is still enough to take it out of effect.
That's why they won't retire the A-10.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the state of the art and why it's us. When we started in on this project, I guess I kind of naively assumed that we would just have the data that, we could get the data that we needed, and that it would, in fact, be data and not just a collection of audio files set up in the exact way that some guy that I'm never going to meet wanted it, and then another collection of audio files set up in the way that some other different guy who did not have the same ideas as the first guy wanted it. And perhaps that was naive of me, but is that what you've experienced with your previous machine learning projects?
So it kind of depends, right? So I've done some image classification stuff, the standard data sets you see, ImageNet, or any one of those other sort of problems. You have much more well-defined data sets because these are data sets which are used by thousands of researchers for various things. So the metadata is very solidified. The files are, very structured, very consistent. There's often times even included code or a procedure that you'd use to properly process or do augmentations on this sort of stuff. However, the moment you move away from the standard set of academic data sets to a data set that just some guy made, you don't have the same level of consistency and usability of these data sets. If you just pull a random data set off of Kaggle or Zenodo, like they'll probably be in good shape and usable, but doesn't mean you have to, you can't spend an hour or two making sure that data actually like, works with how you want to use it. And that's sort of the problem when you move to more niche applications like audio. You don't have the data as like high quality anymore. Like the data you can find available is just like, you know, a random selection of guns or other things. And then again, like when it's just audio and doesn't have corresponding data, or they didn't collect it, they're scraping it from the internet, you can't verify that information. And that's important when it comes to this stuff. Like if you're training your model on, you know, 9mm, but it's actually 45, that's a big deal. Like that means that when you actually get it to run on that, it's going to misclassify stuff. It's, you know, it's one thing for image stuff where, oh, we have a dog that classifies as a cat. It's like, okay, it's still probably going to get it right. There's enough data in both of those classes, and, you know, they look similar enough that that's okay.
Plus, you could just always verify that by looking at it.
Exactly,
and be like,
yeah.
Oh, that's a dog.
Yeah, but when it comes to audio, like, you know, you hear a gunshot, and it's like you could even show it to, you know, like an operator that's heard these guns many times. A particular gunshot from an audio data set is not really easy to manually verify.
I'll tell that to Sean.
Yeah. But like even when we ask Sean, like he gets it right the majority of the time. If it's an obvious, like, oh, a loud gunshot, like when you hear it with your ears, you know how loud it is and like the situation you're in. But when you hear just the audio file, you lose that context, and that's important. So that's kind of why a lot of these other data sets are insufficient for our use case. Like they don't have enough guns or enough situations, or the metadata isn't like, you know, verified and double checked and make sure that everything is correct. So that's why we have to go out and collect our own data for these things.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, and just that what caliber is being shot actually makes a big difference for things like localization. Not just telling your operator this is what firearm is being fired or what load is being fired, but your muzzle velocity is pretty tightly coupled to your caliber and load and bullet.
And barrel length and stuff.
Yeah. And the muzzle velocity matters a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point that no one else has addressed data-wise for gunshots, is that like you can have subsonic 9mm, you can have, well, we've been calling it perisonic because it's not, I mean, it's technically supersonic for a few feet, right? Or even with like 5.56 NATO, right? A 55 grain target and practice round versus a 68 grain NATO standard versus those are the weights of the actual bullets in the air, versus a heavier one can be different by hundreds and hundreds of feet per second, which changes not only your starting velocity, but then also the amount of friction that they encounter in air, and therefore the bullet slowing model changes, and then it becomes a whole thing. And so it's important to know not just, oh, the gun can shoot these calibers, like, oh, it can shoot 2.23 or 5.56. Like, okay, but like those are different. And that's the problem we've had with data sets before. We had to strip data out of, that's one of the reasons actually that I wrote our dataset management tool, to be able to strip out just specific classes, because we had those ones in there that were like, oh yeah, it's, you know, one or the other. Okay, but tell me, or I'm going to have to pull it out. And so we wound up having to pull it out. And you know, we need to know not just it's this caliber, but it's this, you know, type of bullet or cartridge, excuse me, within this caliber.
Yeah. I mean, and that's why when we go out and record data, we try to record, oh, what gun is it? How long is the barrel? What type of like muzzle brake is on it? For the cartridge, like what's the grain weight? Like what's the tip? Is it hollow point? Is it full metal jacket? Like all these things are very important when it comes to an actual, you know, high speed projectile that is going to make a very different sound depending on what it's shaped like, how fast it's actually moving. So that's why all this data needs to be recorded, and we haven't seen other data sets which even have a fraction of this data included.
Yeah, and now we have a data set that includes data that we've purchased, that includes open data, it includes data that we've collected, and that data that we've collected with all of that attendant super fine-grained metadata is part of the C3GD data set, which is now available on both Archive as a preprint and Zenodo for download. I don't know if you saw, but on ResearchGate, our C3GD paper is very popular in Poland right now.
Oh, nice.
In that multiple people from Poland are reading it every week, which is more than any other country.
That's good.
We should talk a little bit about the drone data collection that Certus Innovations did, because last year we went out on the 2 hottest days of the year, which I appreciate you being a trooper, and we went to a private flying range, which was definitely not my mother-in-law's house. And I appreciate you being a trooper, getting made fun of for your lunch choices by a 5-year-old. You really, I appreciate the sacrifice that you made for Certus Innovations. And then flying out the next day to go to Ohio to collect gunshot data. While I went to Michigan, it was quite a week for the company in general and us in particular. But I was really impressed with the script that you put together for that to try to get because drones sound very different when they're doing different things. And so you had that nice script of, okay, for every drone, we're going to do 3 reps at different times of all of these different maneuvers that we're going to do. And then we're going to take that data and turn it into the largest, arguably only drone classification data set.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, we tried to, get a good selection of drones, and then we tried to do, realistic situations and how the drone could be flying. So we'd have the drone just like passing by the microphones. We'd have it orbiting at different heights. We'd have it, doing erratic maneuvers. And all these things are going to sound very different because, like, as we said before, with the Doppler effect, the speed of the drone with respect to the microphone is going to change how it sounds. Even if all the motors are spinning exactly the same speed, it depends on the position, orientation, and velocity of the drone with respect to the microphones. So that's kind of what we went out to do. Get as many drones as we could find easily, and try to get as much different data as we could. That's kind of Certus Innovations' goal moving forward, is to collect more drone data in a variety of situations and just kind of get that data set up to kind of our standard of how much data and metadata we need in order to develop these systems as best we can.
And in the end, we got 100% test accuracy on the model for classification, which is extremely impressive and doesn't need any qualifications about how there were only 7 different models, and we don't expect that to hold up in real-world performance because we got 100%, and that's the best that you can do, and that's the Certus Innovations difference.
We got 100% by giving 110%.
There we go. That's the one. All right. So on the topic of feature extraction, this is something that we've complained about a lot. Now, nobody's looking into this. No one even justifies their parameters. Now, you, who have much more experience in grad school than either of us, were very quick to jump to the defense of the grad students who are coding and crying about what specifically academic research targets that is different from what we're doing in industry.
How you turn your time series data, i.e. squiggly line on the screen showing pressure detected by a microphone.
Or volume, as some people might say.
I'm calling it time series data that's a squiggly on the Yes. How you turn your volume data into something else that is useful to do machine learning on, as you two have already seen, winds up being very important. So you have your whole paper on feature extraction that's up on Archive that I have actually found very useful while getting up to speed.
Oh, good, because we, mostly Sinclair, worked very hard on that.
But, for example, the STFT time versus linear being a huge difference, it stands to reason. These things make sort of physical or mathematical sense, but it does make a big difference because we're talking about music. One of the things I know about music is that it's not a lot like a gunshot, for example. The types of features that you want to extract when you're looking at music or a drone are very different from a gunshot. And so how you do feature extraction, how you turn your squiggly time series data, again, technical term that we use in physics, how you turn your squiggly time series data into something you can reasonably do machine learning on matters a lot. You can lose information even. If you're doing a Mel log spectrogram, for example, as in your paper, you're actually losing certain information about your higher frequencies, which is where specifically gunshot information, a lot of it is stored. And again, turning the problem inside out, you have the opposite problem for drones.
Yeah, you make a good point about, and I just want to clarify, when we say feature extraction, we mean turning this is how loud things were at different times, into something that the machine learning model can understand more readily, or even that we can understand more readily of, okay, these were the frequencies that were there at certain times. And for like human speech, it's very distinctive. You can hear kind of the resonant frequencies of people talking, and you can even see the individual words blocked out in some cases, which is not the case of just looking at the raw data. But for, like you talked about, oh, well, these are the features that you would look for in music. Like, sure, you'd look for the chords and the harmonies and I don't want to use too many technical terms and have you come after me later for them. But we look at some of the mathematical structures that we have for that, the constant Q transform and linear predictive coefficients and all of that stuff is specific, especially the constant Q transform, which people love to use for gunshots. They're like, well, it worked for music, right? So why wouldn't it work for a gunshot? I'm like, well, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but...
They definitely didn't test it on the Wilhelm Tell Overture.
Exactly. But it didn't do very well. And so they were like, oh, yeah, well, let's go back to Mel spectrograms because those are based on the human ear, and the human ear is pretty well adapted to hear most things. Like, yeah, to hear most things that occur in nature, but a gunshot, we didn't evolve to hear gunshots. So, which is kind of different from, and something that you picked up on almost immediately, that when we're switching from gunshots to drones, that drones actually do have harmonics, and they're not in the same like scales as music, but you can see your way from this is how the human ear works and this is music-based math to drones a lot easier than you can see it for gunshots.
To get me started on how musical scales are actually based roughly on actual harmonics, and so the comparison actually much closer than you might think.
Yeah, and so that's probably why for like Bark scales and Mel scales and stuff, they all kind of fit together because they're all based on some bastardized understanding of some underlying physical properties, right? When Certus Innovations looked into that more, we kind of ran out of runway pretty quickly because there wasn't, it turns out that we had kind of forgotten this, maybe being out of grad school for too long, that when you're doing a paper for grad school, you're looking at one specific thing. So when we were like, no one is saying why they chose their window parameters, and you were like, okay, listen, guys, like it's grad school. They were trying to do one specific thing. They weren't concerned about their, their window size or whatever. And it's only a 5-page paper. Like, well, we did 100 window size in our 5. Yeah, because your paper was about window sizes, and that's the difference. So that is one of the things that I'm really excited about to get into with you. That you almost immediately picked up on, like, well, what if we did in a frequency adaptive window? And I was like, do that. That sounds great. I would love a frequency adaptive window.
And some other much more interesting things that I'm not going to get into, but there's extensions of the idea of a frequency adaptive window that I'm really excited about, actually. Yeah,
I was showing the screenshots to my wife afterwards. I was like, look how well Eric's thing is going. And she's like, is the whole thing supposed to be blue? I was like, no, look, this line is slightly canted to the side, and there's a little rectangle that's not there that was in the other picture. And she's like, so you want more rectangles? I was like, suffice it to say, I'm very happy with the slightly canted line and the missing rectangle. That's what I wanted from hiring a PhD physicist.
Not getting fired yet.
And that's the other thing on feature correction stuff, right? Like, we've kind of reached the limit of how obvious the improvements are for these feature correction stuff. When you look at a basic spectrogram you would see in like one of these other gunshot papers, you could see a gunshot in it, like it has, the right shape to it. But how could you tweak that, adjust the parameters to make it easier for a machine learning model to do that? That's not obvious. Like, we've kind of easily hit, and the papers also have, easily found the best model, the best feature correction techniques for these things because they're like the obvious, like easy to find stuff. Like the ones that look best to your own eye, the machine learning model will also be able to, pick up on. But once you get to the point where we have to, look into adaptive frequencies or like constant Q transforms or MFCCs, like the more complicated stuff, which doesn't necessarily look as obvious when you look at the spectrograms, or like why one parameter adjustment on the MFC or on the log-mel spectrogram would be improved, like that's unclear. And you just kind of have to try more things, run more models, and see which one works.
It's nice having someone who has an intimate understanding of the mathematics of that when we're like, well, we played around with the window length and they're like, integrating more times on either side of the transient obscures the sharpness of the transient. I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, we knew that, obviously, right? But it's just, we didn't vocalize it like that. And being able to, like when we talked about doing time frequency representations, and you were like, I think Wagner-Ville will be computationally whatever. And I was like, how could you know? And you're like, look at the integral, idiot. And that's not exactly how you put it.
No, I think what I said was, look at the Wikipedia page, idiot. It says so right here.
But see, that's the difference. It didn't explicitly say that, but if you look at the double integral, then you saw that it was going to be computationally much more intensive than doing the Fourier transform, which is important. And then, being able to, because I identified, okay, there's like 10 Cohen's class functions, and I don't know the difference between a Tway-Williams distribution and a Wagner-Ville distribution. So this is your problem now.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say that I have an intimate familiarity with the math, but I have intuitions about how Fourier transforms worked, built on 7 years of implementing them by hand in Fortran, right?
Okay, yeah, there you go. Right, and so you can then take those and be like, okay, this seems promising. You bring that back to Sinclair, and he does whatever it is you do around here, and suddenly a model pops out with a 99.99% test accuracy, and I'll be there too.
I mean, the note on like computational cost of these feature extraction models brings up a good point of we're running these models on the phone. So there's a lot of considerations that need to be made when we are running these things on constrained hardware. So, not only do we want to try to run it in real time, which means we need the models to run quickly, we also need to do the feature extraction and the model execution within a faster than real time sort of scenario. And that brings up its own challenges.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I remember when you were at NeurIPS last year, you sent me that a link to a paper about LLM-inspired machine translation or something like that. That was supposed to be way better than anything that we had in TAC Talk. 10 times as many languages and 1/10 of the error rate. And I was like, oh man, like we need to get in on that. And then I go to the GitHub page, and it requires a $1,000 graphics card and someone else paying your electricity bill in order to be able to transcribe a single sentence. And you're like, yeah, sorry, Sinclair, but we're not doing that.
Yeah.
$1,000 graphics card in which year?
Before.
Before times. Okay.
$2,000 graphics card.
Exactly. Now. Yeah. Honestly, probably 3. But that brings up a good point, right? Like there's, especially with, the modern LLMs and transformer-based models, a lot of these models like are very effective. Vision transformers and other sort of transformer-based models can be used in a variety of situations, even in acoustic classification and the stuff that we're sort of dealing with. But the big issue is the computational cost of them. Just because you can get better performance on them does not mean you can run them in the scenario that you want to run them. Either the training time will take multiple times longer than another corresponding model, or let's say it does, run in a reasonable amount of time or train in a reasonable amount of time, then it won't run on your mobile device. Like we have to make sure that, we're not eating up the entire compute on this device when we want to do stuff. Because what if you want to run your Gunshot and your, drone detection models on the same TAC device? We need to make sure that we're not, eating up all of the compute.
You really don't want a situation where Jeff Goldblum comes up and he's like, your machine learning engineers were so busy wondering whether they could that they didn't stop to think whether they should.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Because, back in, I don't remember what year it was that Google published that paper, Attention is All You Need, and kind of single-handedly killed the audio machine learning field. Attention is great. It lets you do for audio processing and for language processing, even computer vision stuff. It lets you do all kinds of great stuff. And then you compare what do we use, FastVIT versus RexNet, and they have a similar number of parameters. And then one of them requires 10 times as many floating point operations or flops. That's one of the main metrics for measuring how efficient or how expensive machine learning models. It requires 10 times as many as RexNet to get a plus 1% better performance. And then you say, okay, well, attention is great and all, but can I afford to pay attention? And then, I remember it was before you worked, but I went to you, and I was like, the dot product attention is so expensive. And you're like, yeah, it's a dot product. that you're doing a million times per second. That's a lot of dot products. Okay,
It's
listen.
an exponential you're doing a million times per second.
That's
Taking an
even worse.
exponential is really the bad part.
Yeah.
Like a dot product is just a matrix operation, right? You toss that in your GPU, that's fast. Doing the exponential,
On your GPU,
yes.
it's fast,
Yes.
but the phone.
Yeah. On your phone, it might be rough. And then the exponential is also bad because there's a bunch of good ways to calculate it, but they're still never going to be as fast as add number and other number, right?
Yeah, when you're doing everything in terms for a lot of the convolutional neural networks, my understanding is that a lot of stuff is done as just like multiply, accumulate, which is a child can do multiply, accumulate, not to that extent, but that's not it's not computationally infeasible like some of the other stuff.
Efficiency matters.
Then we get to the point where we have a model that is better than anything that anyone has ever reported in the history of time, and then we put it on the phone, and everything falls apart. Not everything, obviously, but there are definitely differences between what we see on the phone and what we see on the computer. Now, part of that we actually did some programming for once on this project. Thank me very much. But that was one of the things that's missing from a lot of mobile machine learning work that Certus Innovations ended up looking into is what is done to the audio between when it gets recorded on the phone and when it actually gets to you. And I remember talking to one of our other engineers at the time, and I was like, well, surely the audio source named mic would just be just like a regular microphone that just records audio in the way that you would expect audio to be recorded, right? And he said, do you really trust Google not to mess around with your audio before it gets to you? I was like, I don't trust Google to do anything. And as it turns out, he was right. There's filtering, there's automatic gain control, there's this, that, and the other thing, stationary background noise removal, all this stuff that we didn't want that made the gunshots in particular look way different on the phone. We did some actual programming in the app to make sure that, one, it always uses this microphone here and never this one, because this one, no matter what you do to it, is still tuned for voice. This one can be tuned for farther away stuff. Right? Sometimes it's called the camcorder mic, or sometimes it's called the back of phone mic, or just the mic named back. You'd think they'd have a common way to refer to it, but you'd be wrong. And that seriously improved things. But then what we realized is that there's a difference between, like, ideally, I will never touch this microphone while I'm talking into it, right? But when I have a phone, I am, you're messing around with it, you're touching it, you're dropping it. Yeah, I knew that we'd made it when I dropped one Dart phone onto another Dart phone, and neither of them went off. But there's differences between what we see in the field versus what we can actually replicate, and the reality of the situation on the ground.
So on that note, I mean, like one of the big problems with, again, transitioning from, the data that we collected and running, high quality data through these machine learning models and then actually running it on the phone is just the microphone itself. Like, when we record this, we want it to be as clean, as crisp, as high quality as possible. So we're recording the data on microphones that look like this one. But then when we run it, we're running it on, tiny little cell phone microphones, and they're going to have very different, response curves. They're going to have very different, like everything, as you said, automatic gain control, that sort of stuff. Like, so that means as the very loud gunshot comes in, it's going to taper off the end before we actually want it to. It's going to like cut out data that we wanted because, it's a loud sound, it should be filtered out, because that's how, like microphones that are used for speech should work. And it makes sense for their application, but for our application, it's, detrimental to what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and so that's what we've put a lot of effort into, getting as much of a diversity of microphones as we possibly can. I don't know if you remember our scramble to get microphones ordered for the New Jersey test, because we found, great prices, great products, free shipping from this site called B&H. And then we go on we find them one day, we go on the second day, there's a big banner at the top, like, by the way, we're shutting down not only our in-person store, but also our online store during Passover, because for religious reasons, we can't take in money during Passover. So make sure you get everything ordered by 5 p.m. today. Like, oh my God. So and we finally, we got everything that we needed, and we set up our, incredibly diverse array of microphones with our Raspberry Pis with multiple microphones plugged into them. of varying qualities. But it's hard to get microphones that are suitable for gunshot detection at a reasonable price, because who would want that, right? Human voice goes from, 50 hertz to like 8,000 hertz, somewhere in there. And so for a high quality microphone, you might be able to get 20 hertz to 18, maybe 20 kilohertz. But the phone records up to 22 kilohertz, and the gunshot goes up to like 70,000 to 90,000 hertz, right? 70 to 90 kilohertz. And so you're going to lose something off the top end no matter what you do. You're going to lose something off the bottom end no matter what you do. And that's just something that you, in particular, as the machine trainer, have to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, especially dealing with that sort of thing, like losing frequencies on the top and bottom. Like there's plenty of like impulsive loud sounds that sound like gunshots, right? Like there's nail guns, there's fireworks and whatever, even like clapping in the right scenario against, the proper microphone sounds like it. But when you lose that, low or high frequency stuff, the sounds that sound like gunshots sound more like gunshots than they should, right? Like a firework is very like, a lower, like poppier sound. But if you filter the higher frequencies out of a gunshot, it's going to sound like a firework. And that's kind of part of the problem that we have to deal with, is you have to carefully consider, the quality of the microphones and the different frequencies. And then when you're running it on a particular device, like, oh, what is that device doing? Is it taking lower frequencies or higher frequencies, or what is it doing to the audio? And we have to consider those sort of things when we're actually developing and running the models on these devices.
So speaking of filtering out high frequencies, I want to go back to what you said about hearing the gunshots bounce off of the foothills of the Catskills when you're growing up, right? And how they sound different from each other, and it sounds different from an actual gunshot from a gun that you're firing. And this was a big problem for us when you and Rick went out to do that. Rick is our CEO, the big boss of the company and one of the founders. And so you guys went out, right? And you did that first in-person test, and it kept miscuing off of, you'd get the gunshots, and then sometimes the Foley would set it off, and then the echoes of the gunshots coming back would also set it off. So we did, I think that was one of our first, our first foray into digital signal processing. That's when we added the second channel so with the MEL spectrograms, which is modeled off of human hearing, to emphasize low frequencies like human ears do. And then we added in the linear frequency spectrograms so we could get those high frequencies, because at risk of being too technical, echoing is a low pass filter operation. So and according to Rick, that worked great because it didn't cue off of the echoes anymore, because they were missing that critical high frequency information that we could now see because we were using two spectrograms, which I believe we're one of the first people to actually do that for gunshots.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the important parts about like actually going out when you have your operationalized model and testing it, because, echoes and bouncing off of buildings and stuff is not data that you would want when you're doing the recording of the stuff. If you have a massive echo on every gunshot that you make, that's bad data because it's not consistent with like the majority of stuff. But when you go out and test it, you need to find those sort of scenarios, because if you don't have echoes, if you don't have like random occlusion from buildings or foliage or like other things like that, then it's not going to be realistic to the scenarios that can be done. And that's why like other systems don't do as well in like these scenarios.
Yeah, and we actually got our second foray into digital signal processing by accident after the New Jersey test, when we were trying to manually extract thousands of gunshots from these audio files. And if you just look at the time series squiggly lines, you can't at all see where the gunshots are supposed to be because there's wind noise and there's other stuff going on, especially from the microphone that was closer to the table. I can hear you guys reloading and I can hear you guys talking. And so we'd see these spikes show up, and then all of our automated extraction methods would fall apart. And because as you pointed out, if you could just extract audio gunshots out of random audio, then we wouldn't need to do machine learning. You would just do that, right? So I was like, look, all this stuff is down here on the bottom of the spectrogram. Why don't we just put a filter on it to just strip all that stuff out? And then suddenly everything looks beautiful. And we're like, well, maybe we should just train on that, because you can't see all of the stuff that the model will no longer see, the stuff that we don't want it to see. And that worked really well. We had to do a little bit of stuff with like amplitude adjustment, like feeding that information, like late fusing that information. But overall, it massively improved, right? And then and we showed that to you, and you're like, yeah, I don't think that's going to work for drones, because you're going to pull out all of your drone sounds. Like, listen, man, that's why we have two models.
Yeah.
So what's next for Certus Innovations? I mean, for my part, as the program manager, I would like to see this stuff go out into the field maybe every week. I mean, Pete's got a pistol permit now. You've got hearing protection. Just go out and shoot some guns on company time. We've got that little sectioned off area behind the building that maybe the landlord will let us fly some drones occasionally. And, there's a big push across the DoD now, especially in like special operations forces. They're saying, don't hide the data, don't hide the ball on what your TRL is. Like, just put proof in my hand or don't talk to me. And I think that's something that Certus Innovations has done well previously, that we don't overrepresent what we can do, right? Remember on the NCC when everyone's like, they said it couldn't be done, but you guys did it. We're like, hold on. Yeah. We did, this is what we did. Everyone's like, it's correct. Like, no, it's internally consistent. And that is part of our, technology transparency delivery. We delivered, we were transparent about the technology. But, it's an important part of our company culture, is making sure that our mouths don't write checks that our technology can't cash. A check is a piece of paper that we use for. We have interest from AFRL. We have interest from Army DevCom. We want to get interest from Special Operations Forces. So we gotta test these things to death, to the point where they don't die, no matter what happens. And in order to do that, I'm going to need you two to do all of the actual work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from the machine learning perspective. Like, what we're going to do is just, get more data, get more calibers, different guns, and just push that further. And with, Eric building better feature traction methods for us, the goal is to get, more information out of what sounds we can hear. And then especially with the localization stuff, it should be, a big improvement over the current state of the art and what sort of information they currently have on that.
And I am looking forward to bringing basically two intuitions and seeing how far I can push them. Gunshot, fast. Fast means small time difference. Small time difference means high frequency.
I think that sounds like a great starting point.
I mean, already making some progress, so
yeah,
might be able to push it pretty far.
You did make that line lean slightly, which was I consider that to be a big win. No, but this is, I think, an important part of pushing this forward, is that if we are at the state of the art, then we have to come up with something that other people haven't tried, or they haven't been public about trying. Remember that company we met with a couple of years ago that tried to flex on us? Like, well, one of our guys was friends with John Tukey of the Cooley Tukey fame. Like, yeah, but didn't he die in the 90s? Which, it doesn't mean that he didn't have a good mentor, but bro, you can't ride that wave of I knew this cool guy 25 years ago, my man has a PhD now. So,
I mean, yeah, in that amount of time, the gunshot, detection classification field has moved significantly. It went from very signal processing sort of heavy approach to now we're using machine learning and, computer vision based models on acoustic problems. And it's not even you would argue it's not even the same sort of technology under the hood anymore.
And what's funny is that a lot of the newer machine learning stuff, at least the papers I've been reading, they seem to be neglecting all the signal processing that was done before.
Yep.
And so there's sort of an opportunity you can drive a truck through, to mix my metaphors on purpose, in terms of getting your machine learning model, getting our machine learning model, Certus Innovations machine learning model, a better ladder to climb on, a better, shoulders to stand on.
Yeah, and I think that there's still, we can see in the literature that's coming out now, some of these ideas are underdeveloped. They say, oh, other people used MFCCs, so we're going to use MFCCs. And you found that paper that was like, oh yeah, MFCCs used to be important, but now that we're doing deep learning, that's not, those priors don't hold up anymore. And we can do more interesting stuff. And there's also a lot of machine learning stuff being left on the table Right, we found that paper from last year, like, oh, we use support vector machines, or that one that I sent you where like we use VGG and AlexNet. And like, stop doing that. That's please never speak to me of, these ancient machine learning models when we have ones that are, literally 1/100th the size, that are with 1/5 the error rate. Just use that.
Yeah.
We haven't even hit the limit of what we can do with the machine learning models that are available for us to pull in and ideas for us to pull in from other fields of machine learning before we even get into the like super advanced stuff that you wanted to do.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like on that note, with the people and they can use their like older models like SVMs and older deep learning models because they're not dealing with the same sort of constraints that we are. They don't have noisy data. They're not running on bad microphones. Like they're just running on their very small set of guns, which oftentimes the calibers and the like gun model overlap. Like they have 4 guns and 4 different calibers, but like we're dealing with like upwards of 30 guns and upwards of 12 calibers, which means that we have multiple guns per caliber, multiple barrel lengths like per caliber, like all these things.
Some of them silenced.
Yeah, some of them silenced. Like all these things that like none of these other data sets have had to deal with, which means that they're able to use these bad model architectures and feature extraction methods because they're not dealing with the problem in its fullest form. A noisy data with bad microphones on small devices. Like that's also part of the problem of like transformer-based models is you need a lot of data in order to get them to actually work well. And the acoustic, gunshot classification field doesn't have enough data. Like our data set is the biggest and it's still insufficient for transformer-based models. So we're still pushing it further.
Well, since I know that you are comfortable going to your coworkers' mother's houses, we should take a trip out to Oregon to see Sean's mom and borrow her hundreds of guns, and then you can have all the data that you want.
Spend a month with earmuffs on, basically.
Yeah. I gotta protect my hearing. In this year, the doctor says that I have a built-in earplug on this side.
You got to protect your built-in gunshot classifiers.
Exactly. Audio is cool, right? I think we've established that at Certus Innovations, we do believe that audio is a very important integral part of these edge detection situations. But it's not the only part, or at least phone-based audio is not the only part. And so we've had some collaborations with the WearTech team, who, great guys, super technical, but they have a different hardware platform than we have. And one problem that we ran into, that I had to do some quick experiments to save face with Army DevCom, is that that guy said, hey, we used your FALCON models on these WearTech watches, and the detection rate is great, but the false alarm rate is also high. And I was like, no, that doesn't. You see, because I have this, $1,000 Android phone that Pete purchased for me, where I see absolutely no false positives, but I can trigger a true positive if I need to. And he was like, yeah, that really hasn't been my interaction with the technology at all. So then I installed it on one of the phones that we found in like the bottom of that trash pile, and it started going haywire because there was some difference in the microphone that it was not accounted for in our training data that doesn't show up when you run it on like one of our cell phones or on one of the nice Samsung phones. That does show up when you stick it into a smartwatch. And now this is something that we have to deal with, right? And that's part of the problem that other people don't face, that Certus Innovations we're trying to tackle, is that we don't control the hardware. We don't control the situation in which it happens. We don't control how much mud is caked on the guy when he's trying to use the microphone for detection, right? These are all things that we need to come up with a way, whether from a signal processing perspective or a machine learning perspective, or maybe even a programming perspective, to I'm an important part of this team to work through and to get around. And so it's not just, for me, sensor fusion isn't just about, we're going to get EOIR worked in, we're going to get radar and RF and all those things worked in. But, okay, there are 100 different types of microphones out in the field that it might be used on. it better work because, one day some guy's going to pull a Motorola out of his pocket to use with the technology. And you're like, sorry, we only support Samsung. He's like, but I have a Motorola and I can't get another phone. And I would like to detect drones, please. And it's got to work. Mm-hmm. So we've covered a lot of ground in this discussion so far. And it's easy to sit here in the studio and say, we got 99%, 100%, whatever. But I think there's an important distinction to be made between what is possible in the lab and what is the state of the art. What does it actually look like when we get out there? So we have right now a couple of our plugins are available through tac.gov. tac.gov/plugin/tacdog if you're interested in machine translation and speech-to-text over constrained communications networks, and tac.gov/plugin/dart if you are interested in our gunshot detection. Those plugins will let you test out the applications yourself, see how well they work in your particular use case, and be able to prove to yourself that we are at that TRL 5 to 6 level that we say that we are. Going forward, we have some goals that we're trying to meet. We want to submit the FALCON technology to ESOF in December, which means that we need to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that our technology is as good as it says that it is, and accompany that data has to accompany that package. And we are targeting next summer to get this up to TRL. I mean, in my ideal world, it's TRL 8, but definitely TRL 7 to be able to be confident to hand it to someone and say, why don't you take this out into the field to test it, not to stake your life on it, but to test it in a realistic environment that, and we believe that it will be able to back that up. That is very important to us at Certus Innovations to be transparent about what our technology can and can't do. And in this case, we think that we have, and we are headed towards more can than can't.
And you want to know more, you can also check out Sinclair and Ryan's paper on archive.org. That's the arxiv.org. Should be pretty easy to find for Quinn and Gurney.
Gurney and Quinn. Gurney and Quinn 2026 and Gurney and Quinn 2026.
Gurney and Quinn 2026 and Gurney and Quinn 2026.
Yeah, and those papers come associated with the data sets that we use. So, if you want to test them out on your own stuff, has the paper and the code with it. Or, if you want to coordinate with us to go out, collect more data, do some more testing on these models, feel free to let us know. Yeah,
so if you want to replicate any of the results that we've released, anything that we've submitted to conferences or to publications, we like to target open access publications and open access conferences because contributing back to the open science community, as someone who, as a company that has benefited tremendously from the open science community, it's important for us to give back to that. And that you can prove to yourself that everything that we have released does in fact work how we say that it does. And I think it's important to keep in mind that that's just what we're willing to give away for free.
Imagine what you get if you pay us.